So, my name's Robert McKay, and I am a master gardener. I've been there for about 3 years now. The first question everybody, well, at least one has asked is, did my wife get angry at me? I had some surgery to remove a tumor off my nose, and so I had some Mohs surgery, and they took my forehead down and patched it onto my nose where they cut a big hole in it. And it was healing nice, and then I rubbed it with a towel the other night, and so I tore that off, so I had to put my bandage back on. But anyhow, I grew up in northwestern Pennsylvania, so the the lake effect snows were a common thing when I was growing up. But we were, I had this huge garden when I was growing up. My parents almost had an acre's worth of vegetable garden, and that's what we lived off. We had to kill 2 deer to have enough meat through the winter. We left there when the Rust Belt really got going well and all the jobs left. I went into the Navy, retired from there, worked for a phone company, waved goodbye when they went to Alabama, and then went back to school at Wake Tech for my associate's degree in horticulture. And since then I've worked at landscape architects, a design build firm, you know, the ones that come and mow and blow your yards and that kind of thing. I worked at an on-site wastewater treatment center. We redesigned where the toilets would go into these treatment tanks, and then we'd use that water to irrigate your yard with. And now I work at Atlantic Avenue Orchid Garden. And the whole point of this is really based upon the work that I did at Integrated Water Strategies and working at the Garden Center. As a salesperson for plants at a garden center, I'm a little odd. I tend to be an advocate for both the plant and the person buying. I don't want the person buying a plant that's inappropriate, and I also want them to think about their buying and having to deal with the living organism. So that's kind of the direction I'm going with this. I'm not going to give you a list of the right plant for the right, but I am going to talk about making those choices. Whether or not that hits your button, I don't know. If we're off the track and this isn't doing it for you, then we'll go somewhere else. This is a free-flowing kind of thing. I like to talk to people, and if that isn't where we need to go, then we'll go somewhere else. All right, so, oh, that's too bad. Expectations. When you begin looking for a plant, what do? Well, most folks, no maintenance. And when you start talking to these folks about what that means, what they want to do is they want to shoot it in the ground and walk away. And they never want to have to mess with it again. And you kind of have to wonder, well, if that's what you're doing, why are you here? Plastic or silk works a whole lot better. They want long blooms. They want that color to last forever, which means no annuals, because they have to dig that up and change it every so often, right? But they don't want bees, especially on that walkway going into the house. How many plants that have blooms don't have pollinators?
No.
Gardenias come to mind. It's about the only one I don't see a stinging pollinator on very often. Even roses, for the most part, Japanese beetles are their biggest visitors, right? No matter what it is, it's got to work in this one spot that they think they need a plant in. You know, if it's a round plant, it's got to fit in this square hole, right? So, you know, you start talking to these folks and trying to get them to broaden their horizons a little bit and maybe send them away from the garden center with some homework. You know, what do you need to do? How big will it get? How big is the spot?
Yeah. How tall will it get? It's not just X and Y, you got to look at Z. You know, where's the window start? They only want it to be this big and this small. They don't want to have to water it. Or if they're irrigating, they don't want to have to adjust their irrigation system to work with that plant. And I got a call before the snowstorm, people asking me about some plants, whether or not they needed to cover them because they didn't want the limbs to break with the snow and ice on them. Well, if you're concerned enough to call me, then put a blanket on it. They can't get sick. They don't want to have to spray. They don't want to have to send samples to the plant disease clinic at NC State. They just, you know, don't want to do with that. And it can't die. Not everybody has the Lowe's and Home Depot return policy where, you know, if you don't water it and you don't treat it well, they'll replace it. If you're going to buy a plant, then don't plan to ignore it, right? Perfect form. A lot of people buy those spirals, and if they don't want to do maintenance, how long does that spiral last?
A season maybe?
Yeah, if that. Especially if it's in full sun. All of these expectations have nothing to do with what the plant needs. You know, are we looking at how to allow this plant to thrive? And a lot of the times we don't. We're looking for a specific color. We're looking for long blooms, whether it's annuals or perennials or camellias or whatever, anything. A lot of times when we look at installing a plant, we give no thought to what the plant is or how to allow that plant to thrive. Now, for those of you that work here at the Arboretum, these kinds of things should be second thought. I mean, you shouldn't have to think about it. And even the master gardeners, those of us that are truly plant-oriented, it becomes second nature as well. But when you're dealing with the lay person, a lot of this stuff gets lost in the shuffle. So I'm going to cover some things, very basic things, about making sure that your plant is going to thrive. And the first thing is sun. And it seems obvious. Sometimes it's not. How many people have seen a Lenten rose out by the mailbox? Yes, it blooms for 3 or 4 months, but then it's going to die because you've fried it, right?
I mean, we have no left.
So, some basic things. Full sun is considered 6 or more hours, right? Is that full sun got to be from start to finish? Does it have to be constant contact? It can be 2 hours in the morning, an hour here, 2 hours there, and so on and so forth, right? It's an aggregate. So full sun being 6+ hours is also supposed to allow you to adjust for your winter sun as well. So what's one of the caveats that we need to talk about as far as plants? They don't read their tags. So, you know, you have to kind of adjust depending upon what the plant wants. The tag may say full sun, but it may not mean from 2 to 4. You know, full sun in the morning may work just fine. 3 to 6 hours, filtered or dappled. Most of your plants that you buy for this zone 7, if you had a filtered or dappled situation, most of your plants would be happy in that situation. Grasses, maybe not. Anything that demands full sun, like your vegetables or grasses, may not be happy with just 6 hours. Tomatoes aren't happy unless you give them, 8 hours or more? So again, you have to kind of adjust. And then 3 hours shade, the difference there is whether or not it's deep and dark, like a forested situation, or you've got your backyard in a high canopy tree and it's bright shade, you want to take that into account as well. Am I telling anybody anything that they don't already know? Maybe I'm presenting it in a little bit different way. When you're looking at your moisture, you have to look at your landscape. What does your property do? Where does the water drain? All those kinds of things. Are you close to your downspouts? Do you have downspouts? Or, do the plants get beat to death when it rains as it comes right off the... Because that's something you need to look at too. Are you planting next to pine trees or oaks that are going to rob as much of the water as is possible? Your soil conditions. Too bad Gina's not here. Soil condition. What's the first thing we should do if we're doing it correctly? Get a soil test, right? What other mitigating factors should we take a look at? How about drainage off of a driveway? What does drainage off of a driveway do to your soil? It's concrete, it leaches an alkalinity. So if all things were equal, if you had a hydrangea on the upper side and a hydrangea on the lower side, one would be more blue and one would be more pink. Same thing with the driveway, you have the exhaust from the cars. Do you have pollution intolerant plants? Those kinds of things also need to be looked at. That affects your soil. Leakage from your cars, the oils and gasolines from that can also. Salt. Everybody use salt today or the last couple of days? If you use table salt, it's probably killing your plants, right? It might work, but it's not plant friendly. All those kinds of things. And then finally, the size of the location. As I said earlier, what's the height before you get to your windows? How wide is it going to get? Do you want to prune? Do you not want to prune? Those kinds of things. So this is what you start with. Or this happens a lot, especially in the garden center, because people will pick up a plant and say, well, it's just the right color. Well, where are you going to put it? Well, I'm going to put it here. Well, it won't last. So a lot of times we purchase a plant either because we know what it is and we have to have it. For example, when I first started, I bought snake bark maples because I like the peeling bark off of them. But they have to go in full sun, right? But I was going to have a snake bark maple. So, if you buy this plant that you just had to have, your only source of immediate information is that tag, right? So what does it say? And this isn't any kind of special plant, but I know this one pretty well, so you talk about what you know, right? So, a curly leaf privet, it says it's sun to shade, 6 to 12 feet tall and 5 to 6 feet wide, zone 7 to 10, and the price. And that's usually what's on the tag, right? Mm-hmm. So really, what is that telling you? What does that tag say? It says it's pretty adaptive depending upon what kind of sun you have. And if you know anything about the plant, that's a true statement. It can go from deep shade to full sun. 6 to 12 feet is a little conservative. 5 to 6 feet wide is also a little conservative. Zone 7 to 10. This one bites a lot of people in the rear end because they really don't understand what that means. So this says it can go from North Carolina to Florida, right? Okay. And if you buy a lot of plants, what does $29.99 mean to you? It's a 3-gallon pot. Plants usually are about $10 a gallon, right? So then now you know how to estimate what the cost of the plant should be. All right, so here's another one. This one's pretty popular here too. Where do you see this one all the time? On either side of your doorway in pots as you go into the house. So this is dwarf Alberta spruce, and it says sun to part shade, 2 to 3 feet wide, 3 to 10 feet tall, and zone 5B to 7. So when we look at these two plants and the tags, what do you know about this dwarf Alberta spruce? What is the tag in comparison to the ligustrum telling you?
This is the edge of its range.
Exactly. So it says full sun, but it doesn't want that 2 to 4 out, that sun from 2 to 4 during the height of summer. It absolutely doesn't want it. So this is a plant that just off the tag, if you understand what the tag's telling you, you would put this under cover probably in the afternoon, so it can get sun in the morning, sun in the afternoon, but not during the heat of the day. So as I said, sometimes, that zone gets you. So when we talk about zones, what kind of zone is this? Huh?
It's a cold zone.
Right, the hardiness zone. How cold, how many cold days during the year can it tolerate? All right, some tags now are giving you the heat zone too. And so what does that tell you? It tells you how many hot days out of the year above a certain temperature it can handle. Does anybody know what the heat zone is for this location? It's 7. Believe it or not, we are 7 and 7. Maybe downtown we're heat zone 8 or hardiness zone 8. Everybody know what the heat island effect is? Okay. So there are areas in town you can get away with a zone 8 plant pretty easily. But our zone, heat zone, is zone 7, and it's reverse of the hardiness zones. So it gets bigger as you go north rather than getting bigger as you go south with the hardiness. A lot of the plants that you see, like this dwarf Alberta spruce, a lot of those are grown out west in Oregon and Washington. The hardiness zone is the same, but the heat zone is slightly different out there. So, you have to keep that in mind when you think about where plants might come from when you buy them for your property, right? We get a lot of plants, at least at Atlantic Avenue, from out west. And they will do fine here, but you need to pay attention to things like, well, maybe not 2 to 4. Maybe I need to find a spot where it's got a little bit more shade. So, along with the tag, you need to know where to go look to find more information about this. So you have your NCSU. I don't know if this is going to work. It works on... No, it's not. I was going to click on that and go to the ligustrum page, but that's all right. Does everybody know what this is?
Somebody said, no.
You've never been to the plant's site on it?
No.
Maybe we shouldn't admit that, right? I think that's our credibility, but.
We might have been there from Googling.
All right.
But we
Another-
probably got to Missouri, they come
All
in
right,
first.
so I'm going to break a cardinal rule. As a master gardener, we're not supposed to use non-research-based information or resources, right? But I like Dave's Garden. And the reason I like Dave's Garden is not because its information is always correct, but because you get commentary from everybody who grows this thing. And it's worldwide. People will comment. And so what you begin to see is, well, the ligustrum. A lot of people don't grow it anymore. Why?
It's out of control.
It gets out of control. The thing's invasive. And so.
They must not have deer. Anybody who thinks it's not invasive if you got deer, right?
Well, and, you know, that's something else, and I'll talk about that here in a minute too, is, you know, who are you feeding? But Dave's Garden and the NC State website, those two resources, along with the tag, give you most of the information you need to make decisions about what plants will work in your yard, understanding that they do not read their tags. Your results may vary, and your yard is nothing like your yard. And that's important. Even people who are next door to each other treat their yards differently. Things will happen, even if everything else is the same. How you work in your yard will affect your plants differently than your side by each neighbors. All right. One of the things I talk a lot about to customers at the garden center, or even when I'm doing presentations for master gardeners, is it's nice that you bought that plant, but what is it doing for you? What is your end goal? What are you trying to achieve? People don't think about this as much as they should. So, screening. Do you want to hide that rusting Chevy in your backyard neighbor's? Or are you just trying to provide a separation from the sidewalk to your front porch, let's say? Sometimes just even a small hedge of rosemary is all you need to provide this sense of separation. A lot of people don't think about anything other than this big old wall of green. Well, it doesn't have to necessarily be that. Color. The white gardens would be one that is specific to that. Different shades of pinks. We've had people wanting, to try to get as many different hues or shades of pinks as they can, or reds or whatnot. And when you talk about color, most of your perennials and most of your trees and shrubs have a bloom period, right? So you need to pick your plants such that they will give you color as long as possible. That's why, we talk about having your bones, your trees and shrubs, and then picking other things, not only just to provide interest, but also to extend that bloom period. Fragrance, again, sequencing the blooms, trying to get as many throughout the season as you possibly can. Anybody ever try to do a fragrance garden in the shade? Ain't gonna happen. Well, it might, but not very easily. Are you trying to feed the birds? Are you planting berries? Blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, the berries on the ligustrums and hollies and all that kind of stuff. What is your focus? Are you trying to bring more birds in? And it's not just the berries, it's also hiding places for the birds. Any small shrub provides cover for these birds. A lot of people will have this amazing lawn and there's no birds in it because there's no small shrubbery for them to hide. Pollinators, bees, whatnot. Formal gardens, cottage gardens. A lot of people like these simply because you can just throw the seeds and the bulbs out and things happen. They don't have to mess with it. Naturalized, same thing. And this is a two-part kind of question. Some people want to feed the deer, and some people don't. I have a couple of rabbits in my yard that don't bother my vegetable garden at all, which is kind of cool. I see them out there and whatnot. Groundhogs. Anybody ever had a groundhog in their vegetable garden? There is nothing more destructive, is there?
Moles.
They will destroy, not like a groundhog.
groundhog.
One day and your entire raised bed is gone. All right, and then the perfect green sword. You know, this is the thing. Why do you want any of these things? You know, what is your ultimate goal? If your ultimate goal is to go out one day a week and get your exercise, mowing the lawn, then okay. But how else are you going to use it? You should treat your design or your plant selection based upon how you're going to use that space. If that space is going to be nothing but a visual, then where is your focal point? Are you wanting that visual focus to be from the house or from the street? And how do you choose and select and design based upon what your goal is? If you don't have kids and they're not ripping up the yard every weekend, then why do you have this huge yard? You know, why not change that into something else? So, you know, your desired outcome plays a huge part along with what your existing conditions are on your plant selection. Your property, its form and fit and all that kind of stuff, plus what you want to see out of it, should inform your plant selection. Does anybody have any questions up to now? I'm sure nothing that I've talked about up to this point is new. Is it really? Cool.
Yeah. You just confirmed the groundhog problem I had.
Let me tell you about groundhogs. First off, you cannot poison them.
It's legal.
Not because it's illegal, but because they will not take poison. Period. End of statement. You cannot poison them. The other piece is they're considered a nuisance animal, so you cannot trap them and release them somewhere else. It is a violation of state law to do that. You cannot take your nuisance problem and give it to somebody else. So what happens when you call in the animal control folks is they catch it and then they release it on your property in a different place. So, yeah, groundhogs are a problem. Dogs and cats are actually a pretty good solution to groundhogs if you've got them, because they'll kill them and eat them. And you don't have a problem with the law. All right. Because my talk is more geared towards making sure the plant survives rather than what plant, I didn't want to give you a list of plants. To me, you're cutting through the requirement here. You actually need to do some study to find out what plants work well. And my focus is really more as being an advocate for the plant, really. So I'm going to cover this really quick because everybody should know this, or at least heard it. Give it an excellent start. If you're using a container-grown plant, dig the hole, basically dig a bigger, better hole than your plant needs, right? Because we're going to amend the soil. Pretty much everybody here's got red clay, right?
Yeah.
Nutriently, red clay is okay. We have lots of plants that grow in it naturally, right? But it doesn't drain worth a darn. So that's what we're trying to do, is enhance the drainage. Make sure you plant it at the right depth. Don't plant it too deep. Do not create volcanoes. Root stimulator fertilizer. The rule is you do not fertilize a newly planted plant. That's the general rule. But root stimulator fertilizer is a very gentle, weak type of fertilizer, and it helps stimulate the root growth out of the root ball into the surrounding plant material. So we always recommend that. Yes, it means we're adding value to the sale, but it actually makes sense. Mulch. Mulch is never ever going to be the wrong answer unless you're taking a 5-ton truck and dumping it all on top of one tree, right? Mulch is always a good thing. It breaks down, it enhances the soil, keeps your weeds down and protects it during cold weather. We don't usually here have a problem with heaving of plants. Our soil never freezes more than half an inch. We might get crusty grass, but that's about it. Does anybody have any questions about planting container-grown plants? Like I said, I'm assuming that you all have some experience in this. Balled and burlap. The one thing I want to talk about balled and burlap is a lot of times when they spade these things up, they add a little bit of soil on top. Well, they cover the root flare. So where the tree is planted and you get where the roots, they'll have maybe sometimes 4 to 6 inches of soil above that. When you plant a balled and burlap plant, you really need to move the soil on top of the plant away until you find the actual flare, and that's the depth that you plant the plant at. The biggest reason they do that is because they're cutting off a lot of that root material, so they're wanting to add a little bit of moisture holding capability to the root ball. And soil is what holds the moisture. So always look for the root flare. How many people have ordered plants online and you get this test tube and it's got a bunch of root hairs in it and they say, well, here's your plant, and you're looking at it going, it's dead. Anybody know how to plant or get a bare root plant going? You take it out, you put it in water for about, 12 to 24 hours depending. Get it good and moist, and then you can go out and plant it as you normally would. Again, paying attention to the root flare. Appropriate water and time. This goes back to irrigation a little bit. How many people have seen those green bags on trees that have just been recently planted? Those are called gator bags. And they drip water on a constant basis. What amuses me a lot of times is you've got gator bags on and then you have this irrigation system going too. The biggest thing that I could tell you about planting is to water it as you're putting soil in. In other words, put a little bit of soil in, water it, put a little bit more soil in and water. The whole point is to make sure that your root ball is moist. You know where you're starting from. What I see a lot of times is people put it all together and then water it for 5 minutes and then walk away. There's no mulch on top. I mean, there's nothing except for a muddy spot. How do you know whether or not, I mean, you don't know anything. You didn't do a good job. You don't know whether the root system is wet or not. So, not only dig a good hole, but fill it up properly too. And how much water does a plant typically need in this area? The general rule that you find is about 1.5 to 2 inches a week per plant. So when you go out and water, take a glass of wine with you. And as long as it takes you to drink that glass of wine, that's probably about right for watering that tree or whatnot. Any questions?
What kind of wine?
Red or white?
Well, I personally like Rieslings and Malbecs. So. All right, the rule of 3. Anybody know what that is? First year it sleeps, the second year it creeps, and the third year it leaps. When you plant trees and shrubs, it takes a while for the plant to get established into the parent material. So that first year, you're expecting, you read the tag and you did your studying, and it says, well, this is a fast-growing plant, and you wonder why that first year it didn't do squat. Well, give it some time. If it's a perennial, I would say 2 years, because they have a shorter life style and, you know, they're getting established quicker. They don't have as much time to give as a tree or a shrub does. So they get going a little quicker. You would not, how many people bring back plants because it didn't do what I wanted it to do? And then the caveats, I've already said a couple of them. They do not read their tags. Your results may vary. Just because it worked in your neighbor's yard doesn't mean it will work in yours. Okay? All right, so this is my house because I know the owner, and he doesn't mind taking pictures of my house. And the reason I've got this up is, you know, when you decide you want another plant or whatnot, you want to be able to look at your property and assess what's going to happen, or, you know, what plant will work there. So without knowing anything, I'm only going to tell you so much. So this is a crepe myrtle, and this is a red bud, and this is some ivy around that red bud. What do you know about, if I wanted to plant something, let's say in here, what do I know, what kind of plant do I know I have to be talking about?
Hard shade.
Hard shade at least.
Doesn't need much water.
Yeah. The drainage, though, is going from the driveway downhill, though. So I also know that I've got some alkalinity going into it. So if I had a hydrangea in there, I might be able to force it pink without any issues. Anyway, just looking at your property, you know, what you're seeing should help you decide or inform your choice for plant selection. These are all azaleas here.
Which way is the house facing?
Ah, very good question.
South.
Yeah, the house is actually aligned exactly north and south, east and west. So I have, you know, very good sun plants that are providing some shade, and then I can have full sun and full shade basically in the same spot. What kind of azaleas do you think those are? Doesn't matter what you can see, just think about it. What kind of azaleas do you think those are? They have to be full sun azaleas, right? So they have to be encores, probably.
Why is that?
Because encore azaleas can handle full sun. Your typical azalea, if you go back to your old-fashioned style of azaleas, where did you typically find them? Under pine trees, high shade. They bloom once a year. These are in full sun, and actually as that river birch begins to thicken out, and the reason I planted that was because the front of the house was just getting blitzed with sun. Over time, those full sun azaleas, well, they're azaleas. They can also take part shade too. So I've got a plant that adapts to the condition even as the plants grow up around them. I never did say that no maintenance was necessarily a bad thing. If you do your research and you put the right plant for the right conditions, you may get away without doing very much maintenance ever. Everybody know what a loropetalum is? Mm-hmm. All right. So if you bought a Crimson Fire loropetalum, it gets about 18 inches tall and about 2 to 3 feet wide. And if you don't mess with it, that's about all the bigger it's ever going to get. Now, when you look at that tag and it says X height and X width, when should you expect it to reach that? Between 5 and 10 years. And that's, you know, depending upon whether it's in more sun or less sun. You know, you're doing all the things that you're supposed to do, et cetera, et cetera. But if it says that it's going to get 5 feet wide and 10 feet tall, you should expect it to be there sometime between 5 and 10 years. So when you look at a plan, a landscaper's plan, the size of the plants that they're putting in there are at that size. They're what we call mature size. That doesn't mean that they're going to stop growing. It just means that that's what you can expect in this amount of time. So when you choose your plant material, you should choose your plant material based upon how big do you expect it to get in 5 to 10 years, not how big it is now. Because how big it is now isn't going to stay that way. So the encore azaleas can handle a little bit of shade, so as these trees get a little bit bigger, I might end up having to replace the one towards the back, or I prune appropriately so that it gets dappled sun and I'm able to mitigate its shade. Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody know what kind of magnolia that is? Just out of curiosity.
Little gem?
It's a teddy bear. 20 feet tall and 10 feet wide. So you can see how that's going to happen. There's my downspout. So what does that tell you about this grassy area right here? It's moss. So it stays pretty wet all the time. So if you've got a situation where your grass is slowly converting to moss, you have a choice. You can either kill the moss and continue to plant grass, or you can let things progress as they would. The moss is taking over because the conditions are right for the moss. So you can either fight it or you can accept it. I think moss is kind of cool, so I let it be. And I don't have to mow moss very often. And I don't have kids playing on a slope. All of these things are considerations when you're making these choices for the right kind of plant. What you don't see is right here is a hydrangea. And it's interesting, it's always purple, blue. And I thought it would actually kind of get forced a little pink because of where it's at. The drainage that's coming down the hill is actually helping the moss take over because it's a little bit alkaline. Like I said, they don't read their tags. If that's what it wants to do, you can either accept it and go with it, or you can fight against it. Now, I'm a master gardener, volunteer, but that doesn't mean that I know what I'm doing. So what does an expert mean? I've made more mistakes than maybe you have. I took this shot because the whole of my backyard is just full of trees. So the back behind the house is a wooded area. I don't do much back there. There's actually a drainage stream going through the back. So what I have planted back there is some hemlocks. They can handle lots of shade and they can handle very wet feet. So back in here, there's 3 hemlocks. There's a fence back there that defines my property line, and the creek, and then the city's water main system, or actually drainage system. And I just planted some hemlocks back there because they can handle that kind of situation. This is on the north side of the house. The water comes down the hill. So this right in here is actually fairly dry because there's not much drainage in that particular area. And that there is a camellia. And then I've got a yew here. And that yew is supposed to get 12 feet tall, and that camellia is supposed to get 15 feet tall. How long do you think that's going to take on the north side of the house that gets maybe 2 hours of sun in the depth of summer? It's going to take a long time, but I'm okay with that because when I'm up on the deck and I look down and this white by the gate is in full bloom, There's nothing better than all that color down there. So that's really, it's doing exactly what I want it to do. Those plants will survive that situation without any trouble. And it's not the prettiest thing, but I'm not down there very often. I look down. I don't look across or through. You know, it meets my requirements for that particular space. This is my garden area, which is still in the back. You see my rosemary and my bay laurel. I even have an artichoke back there that's growing pretty well. On the northwest side of the house, once the sun clears all the trees in the backyard, I get about 10 hours of sun during the height of summer. And it mitigates. So through the winter, like right now, there's 4 beds back here. So during the winter, only this one gets full sun. Right now, because we're in the process of moving and some other things, I don't have anything planted except for the rosemary and the thyme and the oregano there. I always got those going. But the interesting thing is they don't get full sun, and yet they look pretty decent. And sometimes full sun, you know, the situation is maybe the soil, maybe I've done such a good job of amending the soil that that's really all they need. Just enough sun and good soil. You got to play with it, right?
What are those things sticking up? I'm sorry, irrigation or?
No, when I built all right. So
Sorry.
when I built these beds, this is actually 8 feet long and 4 feet wide. And I'm on a slope, so I terraced the backyard. Originally, I didn't have these posts in there, and then the groundhogs arrived. So I put the posts in and then wrapped them with fence. And then on the top of that, you can see it on this one, there's an electric fence. That's what I had to do to keep the groundhogs out and keep the deer out. I don't have a problem with squirrels. They don't seem to bother my garden. And I do a pretty decent job of growing tomatoes. They grow pretty well back there. And I've never had the squirrels fighting me for my tomatoes. So the groundhogs were the biggest issue. And since the groundhogs are gone, I haven't torn down the fences. I just work around them. I may have to use them again, who knows. So my whole point for showing this is that within 15, 20 feet, your entire sun condition can change dramatically. And you can do completely different things based upon what your position is and so on and so forth. These are apple trees. They're kind of cool. They're urban apples. They only get 2 feet wide. They get about 10 feet tall. You have to have 2 of them, though, for cross-pollination. But between the 2 houses, I get, during the height of summer, 10 to 12 hours of sun. And in the mornings, I even get reflective sun off the other house. I didn't know if it would work. It does. And you can see how the lawn kind of slopes down, and then all that drainage is going to come down the hill and across the patio that I put in and all that. So assessing your property, you know, what would I put in here if I was going to plant this? It's always wet.
Something that can tolerate wet feet.
How about a Louisiana iris? I would kill a German iris in there, wouldn't I? But I could also put in a Leucothoi. Maybe a Gerard's rainbow would do very nicely in there. What's the problem with choosing a Leucothoi, though?
What is it?
A Leucothoi? Do you know dog hobble?
No.
No? All right, Leucothoi, one of the more popular varieties these days is a Gerard's rainbow because it's got a variegated leaf. It's a 3-color leaf to it. Gerard's rainbow is a 4-foot tall plant and a 5-foot wide plant. wouldn't that look really nice in there? The problem is it's a park shade plant. So it would get more sun in that spot than it really would want. But I could put maybe a loropetalum in there if it was not in the drainage swale. Loropetalums are a real adaptive plant. So would a holly do well. A lot of other trees would do really well in there too, and it might actually mitigate some of that wetness problem because I'd have plants taking up some of that water. Not a great deal, but it might. So anyway, taking a look at all that, this right here is a butterfly bush, and then there's my 2 snakebark maples that I had to have. And they're on the upper side of that slope, so they're going to get plenty of moisture, but they're not going to have wet feet. So I don't claim to be any expert landscape designer, but I'm lazy. I do my research up front and try to get the right plant that will work in that spot so I don't have to mess with it later on. When I bought the house, these plants here along the house were already there. This loropetalum is a ruby loropetalum. If I don't, and I'm not staying up with it at the moment, but if I don't pay attention to it, a ruby loropetalum can get 8 feet tall. So, I would lose that window. And I'm getting ready to lose it, but I tend to do most of my heavy pruning in February, like you're supposed to, right? So when I bought the house, the foundation plants were already there, and so I've had to work with what I had. I could pull them out, but again, they're nice plants. They work okay. So I guess my whole point through all of this is allow your landscape and allow your purpose for your landscape to inform your choices for your plant material. Okay. So I'm done with my particular topic. I hope you've learned something, and if not, maybe you've gotten a little bit different aspect on some things. All right, so, I don't know if you guys can see this. I forgot this was in here. How many of you have plats that you can look at? So when you look at your plat, do you ever use your plat as information for making your plant choices? It's a cool way to do it. My whole point here was one line of topography, so it's fairly flat. And then what I did when I presented part of this as a presentation at the Master Gardener's classroom is, here's where I want you to choose a plant, and I gave them 4 choices. And they would look up what each of those plants were, and then they'd try to decide what would work best in that spot. And you can do that with your plats as well, looking at where the sun is. You see where the north arrow is. If this is your driveway, you're going to have drainage off the driveway, so this may be more a little alkaline than it is acid. Where are the windows? How big of a plant do you need? A different way to assess your property than with just walking around it. If you don't want it to be cold, ask yourself. People will tell me, you're not going to have deer here. We've had customers come into the store saying that they walked out their front door into the rear end of a deer because it was up there eating out of their hanging baskets on their patio.
Yeah.
I've had people talk to me about, I live in 5 Points, we don't have deer, and show them the footprints. So, it's not a silly question, especially here. Deer are endemic, especially if you go along the Neuse River Trail. I ride my bike a lot. People are out there feeding deer all the time. Anyway, just, this was another property, actually it's mine, you know, and we know that there's a camellia down there, but, you know, just questions to ask yourself. How high is the tree canopy? What kind of shade are you getting in there? Just microclimates. What's affecting your area that you want to put a plant in? If you're planting in a this is all patio, so you know, do you have to worry about whether or not it's going to be more acid or more alkaline? Do you need to adjust that by adding iron, phosphate, or whatever? Always know where north is. If you go to a garden center and you don't know where north is we need to try to figure that out. All right, so anyway, just another way to take a look at your information. Now I'm done.